Two Riders on the Beach, painted by Max Lieberman, made by Mitchell Harris and Giuseppe Insera. Two Riders on the Beach was painted by Max Lieberman, a Jewish painter from Berlin who was also the leading Impressionist painter in Germany at the time. Lieberman's first attempt at art was a painting called Woman Plucking Geese. It was ridiculed for its straightforwardness and was also called The Disciple of Ugly. After this failure, Lieberman traveled to Paris to study art to a greater degree, returning to Berlin in 1884. Lieberman would soon find inspiration in artists such as Edouard Manet and Edgar Degas, both French Impressionist painters. By 1899, Lieberman has his own version of Impressionist art, and unlike the French, Lieberman tried hard not to detach his art from the subject matter. By 1899, Lieberman founded a group of artists with similar taste to him, known as the Berliner Secession. Becoming a firm leader in the art community, Lieberman would often speak publicly about how art should be separated from politics, because he believed that politics held artists back, and art should be able to be whatever that artist wants their art to be. When World War I came, Lieberman would regularly give art to newspapers to be published. After being a part of the Prussian Academy of Arts for some years, Lieberman was elected president in 1920, and 7 years later he was made an official honorary citizen of Berlin. However, this was short-lived because Lieberman was forced to resign in 1933 when the Prussian Academy of Arts would no longer accept artwork done by Jewish men and women. After this, Lieberman spent most of his days painting pictures of his garden and his wife, Martha Lieberman. Shortly after Lieberman's resignation, he passed away in his sleep, leaving his wife a widow. When Martha was about to be captured by the Nazis, she killed herself instead. The painting was confiscated in the home of a Jewish factory owner and private art collector David Friedman, an Austrian-born man who happened to be an artist himself. During the time of World War I, Friedman volunteered for the Austro-Hungarian army, serving between 1917 and 1918 as an army artist. His job was to draw battle scenes at the Russian front and was decorated for producing sketches very close to the actual fighting. Thereafter, he sketched and painted portraits of generals and soldiers who had distinguished themselves in battle. After returning to Berlin in the spring of 1919, Friedman presented his first exhibition at the Akademie der Kunst on Pariser Platz and published some of his works in the Jewish journal Schlemel. He gained recognition for his artistic work published in various newspapers, as well as exhibitions in the Berliner Secession and numerous galleries throughout Germany. Friedman was an imposing, cultured man who threw lavish parties attended by friends such as the composer Richard Strauss and Hjalmar Schacht, who was to become Hitler's Minister of Economics. It was these friendships that made it hard for Friedman's family to understand the Jewish persecution in the 1930s. His family members tried reaching out to Schacht for help and never heard back from him. As the Jewish persecution was uprising, the Nazis forced Friedman to sell his possessions to them. In 1938, that included passing his country estate to a high-ranking Nazi official, who had also been a family friend. Then, Friedman ended up fleeing to Prague with his family to escape the Nazis, leaving all of his prized possessions back home, including the painting Two Riders on the Beach, where it was soon confiscated by Nazi official Hildebrandt Gerlit. More than 75 years later, after the death of Hildebrandt Gerlit's son, Cornelius Gerlit, Two Riders on the Beach, as well as 1,200 pieces of art found in Gerlit's collection, were found. The painting can now be finally returned to the rightful owner, David Toren. Most of his family died in the Holocaust, and David only survived because his father got him to safety via the Kindertransport. Toren, who would be 94 today, was the great-nephew to David Friedman and the rightful heir to the painting. In 2015, at 90 years old, David Toren, who was a retired lawyer, was now blind and couldn't enjoy the painting like he could 75 years ago. Him and his family members decided to finally sell it where it estimated to be sold for 550,000 British pounds. Out of the 1,200 painting found in Gerlit collection, Two Riders on the Beach was the first to be sold. The auction was to be held in June of 2015 at the Sotheby's, where it managed to sell for $2.9 million, 3 times the estimated price. Two Riders on the Beach is important to Jewish culture because it represents everything that happened to them during World War II. Art is not defined off of its content alone, but by the artist himself and the history of that art piece. Lieberman was a man with everything, but because of the time period that he lived in, Lieberman was unfortunate enough to have his life and art stolen from him. I believe that two riders on the beach being stolen is symbolic of how each and every Jewish man, woman, and child also had their lives stolen from them. I believe it's so important to never forget the Holocaust because it's such a brutal and unforgiving time, and humanity cannot let history repeat itself.